First of all, let me add my warm welcome to all of you. You have taken time off your busy schedules to be here today. I hope you'll find the next hour and a half valuable and interesting, and let us try to make it as interactive as possible. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. I'd like to thank, first of all, Enterprise Singapore for giving us these excellent facilities to make this presentation and for supporting this idea. And I'd also like to thank our partners, ICC Academy, for joining us and all the effort, as you saw from Thomas there, the effort that has been made to produce this this online course. And I'm sure you are thinking to yourself, where does this online course fit into this issue of the fraud and manipulation of bills of lading? This will, I hope, become clear by the time this panel discussion is over. We are very fortunate to have with us some very key people who are working on the front line of this area, in trade finance, in the banks, in the legal area, who have come here to share their knowledge and experience with us. So if I may just say a few words about each of them before we move very quickly to a few opening remarks by them, followed by questions, answers, discussions, criticisms, please, from all of you, on to anything that you hear. And I will also, towards the end, run you through very briefly the IMB register, NVOCC register, and the code of conduct, and really how it all tries to fit in into our discussions today. So first of all, to introduce our speakers, we're very fortunate to have with us Stephen Tan Kok Boon, who is the Executive Director at United Overseas Bank and has been involved in trade services for a very long time, comes with a lot of experience in this area. We will be joined shortly by Aarti Fernandez, who is the Head of Global Trade at Standard Chartered Bank. She's on her way and just a few minutes away, we are told. The third speaker we have is Ramaprasad Perumbala, who is the Vice President and Director of Trade Finance Operations at Deutsche Bank in Singapore. Following that, we have got Baldev Binder, who is the Head of Energy and Commodities at the Singapore law firm JTGB. So if you have any questions of a legal nature, Baldev, I'm sure, will be very happy to answer them. He specializes in all aspects of commodities trading, from trade finance, advisory, and disputes. His clients include banks, traders, and insurers in this area. And finally, I have my colleague of many years, Michael Howlett, who is the Deputy Director of the IMB and a director of our holding body, the Commercial Crime Services. And he will be looking at a number of examples of trade finance fraud. He'll run you through them so that you have an idea of what we are really talking about. It's very important that this is grounded in reality. I'm sure all of our speakers here, panelists, they will not be speaking in general terms. It has got to be grounded on what you are facing on a daily basis. We have got banks here, we've got logistic companies, and we look forward to your inputs, if we have got it wrong. So with that, I would like to ask Stephen to kick off with the first brief presentation. And Aarti, please join us. Thank you. Stephen, please.
Yeah. Good morning, all. My first thing is about the importance of trade finance to Singapore. To me, I think Singapore trade finance has always been relevant and very important to Singapore, particularly the financial institutions, where they derive the revenues from the trades. Okay. And in trade finance, as you know, it involves a cumbersome process, if you would agree, where there's a lot of documentation. So in today's trade finance, you see there's a lot of, we have seen the NVOCC, BL and other stuff. BL serves to be important documents that gives comfort to the bank, bills of lading. So in many instances, there's always dispute on BL, which I think if you have experienced an LC before, using LC before, that goes. A lot of things will happen. And in Singapore itself, the development of trade is so significant. If you look at it, day in, day out, you hear things like digitization, fintech, blockchains. And if you remember, in 2015, Singapore came out with the first world distributed ledger application, proof of concept. And along the way, we have the network trade platform, which has been kicked off. This is an initiative of Singapore Custom. And we see a lot of trade platforms. So it evolves so much. Everything is growing. We hope that all these will give us a better way to do the trade, more simpler and secure. So I think there's a lot of development. And as I said, along the way, BL will still be relevant. A lot of people are saying 10 years back, there won't be any more BL and all those things. But yet, there's no big game changer in the market. So we hope to see, with all this digitization, fintech, blockchain, there will be a big change coming through. Okay? That's something I would like to share in terms of what's happening in trade. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. If there are any immediate questions that you want to ask about these new emerging areas which is going to affect our business, then please, make your comments. Otherwise, hold your discussions towards the end. I'm looking at the audience to see if there is any. In which case, I'd like to move on to Aarti Fernandez, who has joined us. She's the head of global trade at Standard Chartered Bank.
Thanks. Good morning to all. So one of the biggest questions that clients ask us is, why do banks check bills of lading? So I think this is the reason why banks do check bills of lading is because banks need to be very confident that you're actually financing for goods and services, and that you're actually financing the transit as well for the goods and services. And the only comfort that banks get is the bills of lading, because it has title of goods, it has title of ownership, and they want to be ensuring that you're actually financing goods and services. But is it enough really to just look at the bills of lading and get that confidence that there is an actual shipment happening? We've seen many instances in the past wherein there's bills of lading which looks like a bills of lading, but in reality perhaps not. And reality perhaps there's no shipment affected. In reality perhaps it's forged. In reality perhaps it's there is no underlying trade at all which is occurring. How do banks actually manage this? It's a very difficult proposition for the banks, as on one side you have the regulator expectations in terms of having to look through that bills of lading, making sure that you're actually financing for the right goods and services, and on the other side you are in a dilemma as to how do you ensure that the particular services have actually occurred. We've tried many attempts in the past, and I wouldn't say we are completely successful, but we've been almost successful in discovering many such fraudulent shipments, many such difficulties where the shipments have not affected, and in time we've been able to stop these kind of financing. But have we been able to do all? The answer is no. Yeah, and that's where it's very important that as banks we work very closely with the shipping companies and other non-profitable institutions in order to make sure that we have the right rules and regulations in place to help the banks to detect such fraudulent activities and move forward with it. One of the attempts, as my colleague Stephen also mentioned, was the blockchain and the DLT forces which is coming in. Slowly, the trade finance world is moving from a document-based lending into a data bar market intelligence-based lending. And that's where the likes of MAS and so forth are coming forward to the banking communities to say, how is it that we can share data much more effectively so that we know based on the data there is an underlying shipment which has already got affected, and based on that data could we actually affect financing. There have been discussions on that front. There are multiple conversations which are happening, and I think we are in a very, very exciting space wherein in the next few years, definitely there will be a transition into data-based, AI-based lending rather than traditional bills of lading based financing that we're doing. But whilst we move towards that space, between now till then, that's where the banks and the other institutions need to come together in order to have the right set of rules and regulations to ensure that we are able to detect that we are financing the right bills of lading, we are financing the right shipment, we are financing the actual client who wants the shipment rather than perpetrating or infiltrating or supporting the fraudulent activities which are managing it. It's a very difficult space, and I think we're making very good momentum. We work very closely with Mukundan's team in terms of making sure that we have the right set of guidelines in order for the banks to manage this problem even better. Thanks.
Thank you, Aarti, for those opening remarks. We'll come back to each panelist, later on, just to drill down a little bit. But if I may move now very quickly to Ram Prasad. Over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Mukundan, and hello all. I want to talk about how bills of lading have evolved and how important it is for us to have this NVOCC register. Now, the problem with talking about evolution is somebody may say that, look, am I as old as a Neanderthal now? Because I'm going to talk about evolution. Because back when we started our careers, we had largely two sorts of bills of lading. One is a regular line bill of lading that applies regular routes. So you publish routes and then normally issued on the carrier companies' letterheads. And then most of these carrier companies used to have their own offices across the world. And it was that was giving the banks a lot of comfort about whether the bill of lading can be acceptable on the face of it or not, right? So if it was a Maersk in Thailand or in India used to have their own offices, used to issue their own bills of lading on their own letterhead. So you sort of got a comfort. And so it largely tied in with the ICC rules in terms of, you depend on the face of the bill of lading and determine whether something you can conveniently accept it or not. Now, interacting with, say, IMB or some other third-party providers were actually very rare. And it was largely self-regulated. Regulators were not as much, were very closely scrutinizing all those because the trust factor actually existed. And then on the other hand, there was this charter party bill of lading. And charter party bill of lading to new document checkers were always a bit of it required additional attention because it was largely black and white, and then whereas we have moved to color print with respect to the regular bills of lading. So that required a bit of attention. But still, you could always say that yes, there is a reasonable comfort with respect to movement of goods from point A to point B. And so that seems to have changed now a bit, and with these NVOCCs coming into play. Things are slightly different because NVOCCs seem to, it's a fairly good development because it's some sort of an outsourcing as far as the carrier companies are also concerned. They don't have to maintain offices all over the place. They can partner with somebody, in a different country. But the problem is that there has to be some sort of a trust factor that needs to be established. Now, NVOCC seem to issue their own, the bills of lading on their own letterheads, and without necessarily understanding, how banks expect the bills of lading to be, and that's part of the problem. It's probably not a shipping company problem, because shipping companies may actually accept a bill of lading if they trust the bill of lading to be true, but banks are required to follow the rules of UCP, and then we are used to seeing bills of lading in a certain way. It's probably not NVOCC's problem, but it's also the banking problem also. But along the way, obviously, there could be some bad eggs in the basket, and that is why we have an event like this, NVOCC Register, because there are certain, we read information in IMB bulletins or in other case studies or so on, where NVOCCs have there has been some issues with NVOCCs in terms of they not checking with the master issuer of the bill of lading to issue their own bills of lading, changing of information, including notify parties or shippers' names, changing bills of the content of the goods, changing the boarding on-board date, so on and so forth. So all of these we have heard about all these stories. Now that makes the credibility of the bill of lading a bit very, very challenging, because we are unable to verify or take it on face value whether that is a good bill of lading that we can take on and then provide financing. So especially when we get into the financing mode for any of these bills of lading, we have to ensure that there is something that is underlying, wherever we finance. Yes, as Aarti said, we will move from bills of lading as a comfort to data and the client themselves. That will certainly take time. It is happening, but it'll to happen in a big way, it'll certainly take time. But so in the interim, yes, NVOCCs, some ICC is looking to regulate, for the banking industry, this overall structure, and I think that is a good thing to do. And I hope this will be taken up by NVOCCs also. And I hope, Mukundan, you will be able to cover what is the rules of engagement as far as NVOCCs are concerned, and how banks should be reacting to, if it doesn't happen, if the rules of engagement doesn't happen in the way you expect them to happen. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. I think maybe it is worth just emphasizing here a critical point, and that is that the concern for the banks is because the bill of lading is also a document of title, and it is against that document of title that money changes hands. And so it is very important, therefore, as both Stephen and I think Ram was mentioning, that it is very important that that document is properly issued. Because if it is not properly issued, it opens a lot of opportunities for manipulation. But with that, just to make that point, I'd like to move on very quickly to Baldev on some aspects of the legal aspects of bills of lading and how they are abused.
Thank you. Thank you. You see, I can do the legal advice, but I can't figure out the microphone. My name is Baldev Binda, and I think Captain Mukundan actually took the words out of my mouth. I was going to start with where he just ended off. But let me start with this. The BL is a problem. I'm going to be the cynic. I'm going to be the one that says the complete opposite to what the banks would say. I would say it is a problem. The number of times people come to me with the BL telling me, is this a real BL? Is this legitimate? Is there something wrong with it? As much as I love to be a magician to be able to conjure up the answers, that's really not the role of a lawyer. And that's where someone like the IMB actually comes in quite useful to help you sort of go through the BLs, to help you identify whether they're what I call a smell factor, whether there's something not quite right with the underlying trade. Now, why is it a problem? There are three traits of the BL that lend itself to abuse. Number one, it's the title document, as the captain just mentioned. It's a title document. So typically a master BL or house BL that's related to it would correspond to title to the goods. Secondly, it's on paper. This day and age, we are in the 21st century, we've put a man on Mars, on the moon, and we're still using paper for the BLs. Whether that will change, I'm being the cynic that I am, I sort of think no, but it's still on paper, and with paper, you get manipulation. The third trait, it's negotiable. It can be negotiable, put it that way. I can negotiate, I can transfer one BL to another person, and that is where the real value is for the trader. He gets to negotiate, he gets to, think of it in layman's terms, he gets to sort of sell the bill of lading to somebody else. The more people you have in the line, if Michael here starts with one BL and it needs to end with Captain at the end, the more people we put in this chain, the better. The better for who? The better for the trader. He makes it more opaque. It becomes difficult to tell who's in between the different chains. He's incentivized to put as many people as he can into the chain, so you can't verify, or you have difficulty verifying whether the trade has gone on. That's the traits. What these three traits lead on to abuse. What is the abuse we see from the legal side of things? In large part, we see a lot of phantom trades. They're one of two or three different ways of doing it. And I can write a book about fraud now, I think. But you have the phantom trades where the trade doesn't exist at all. There is a BL, no underlying trade. All of it's conjured up. Sometimes the ship exists, sometimes the carrier exists, sometimes the location exists, but the container on that BL doesn't exist. The goods are phantom. Second way of going about doing it, you have double financing or mirror financing. I create an original bill with Michael on my left. Same set of goods, I create a new bill this way. So I've created a whole new mirror trade, a parallel trade that doesn't actually exist. The banks are being duped because the banks don't share the information with one another. The traders know this. So the trader is actually a very sophisticated man. So he knows this as well. And so for the fraudster, he can manipulate this gap in information between the two banks, and that's where double financing comes about. The third mindset of a trader really is that, or the third way the BLs get abused is that they try to roll the BL. The BL is effectively credit. So they try to, if I ship cashew nuts from Ivory Coast to Vietnam, it's a long journey, maybe about 14, 15 weeks. I've got 14, 15 weeks. The BL is with me. I've got 14, 15 weeks to monetize this BL. I can go to another bank. I can go to a trading house. I can go to a counterparty. There are many different things I can do in this 14 weeks. All I need to have visibility on is that come the 14th week, I need to get my BL back. So much like how money lenders used to roll money, this concept of rolling BLs also exists in their minds. They are, the third point I want to make is that they are red flags. The way to spot the red flags is to sort of understand your customer in the first place, whether you're a bank, whether you're a counterparty, what is the driving factor behind this customer. And for me, the common theme that I see in all the cases we deal with that deal with fraud is that there is what we call a conduit trader in the middle. Some guy who has got no skin in the game, doesn't really know what exactly he's doing, he doesn't know the goods, he doesn't know what size of vessel should be used to support the goods, he doesn't know the trade routes. He has just been put in the middle of it to raise financing. And to be able to raise financing, you need a BL. And that's where all the dots join, I think, on this panel itself, you'll see that's where all the dots join between the IMB helping to verify the status of the BLs, the banks who are exposed to fraudulent BLs, and obviously lawyers who then have to clear up the mess. The last point I want to make is to do with the reason why it's important to the banks. I think this has been mentioned many times before, and the banks would agree with this. It's you've got modern day traders move from LC trades to open account trades. I think people are starting to move more towards that. The problem with LC trades back in the day, anything wrong with the BL, any sort of discrepancy, and a bank would not pay. The bank would only pay if A says A and B says B and so on. Now, sometimes the trader thinks, oh, it's gone to the bank. The bank is going to verify the authenticity of the trade. That's not really the bank's job under an LC payment. The LC payment is that there's an independent, autonomous document put forward before you. The bank pays if all requirements are met. That's a very simple process. If the documents are discrepant, or if there's a notion of fraud or suspicion of fraud being done, then everyone gets into a faff. They call the lawyers once again, and we try to injunct the bank from paying. It is messy. It is difficult to prove a fraud. I think the number of times it comes to us and we sort of can smell it, everyone can smell it. They sort of think, yes, something is not quite right here, but to prove a fraud, it's a difficult bar. It's a difficult threshold to reach. And because of that, I think it's been a problem before, and it'll still be a problem. But I think the IMB, with education, with the banks taking steps with digitalized technology, these things can be mitigated. Will it be eradicated? I doubt so, but mitigation perhaps would be the best way of going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those remarks. Are there any questions before I pass on comments very quickly, or shall we keep the discussion to the end? Baldev has raised a number of quite important issues there, one of which is this issue of rolling the bills of lading over a period of time. And the question is whether that is the right practice or not. So there are a number of questions which arise from this. So maybe we'll come back on that. So
sure. Free legal advice always.
So let me pass on now to Michael for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mukund. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have been asked here today to talk about recent trends in the manipulation of NVOCC bills of lading. And the first point, or the first comment that I'd like to make, is that the NVOCC register, it is not a slur on the NVOCC industry. NVOCCs play an important role in trade. They're crucial. Without the presence of NVOCCs, trade would not be able to function. I'm also pleased to say that the overwhelming majority of NVOCCs are extremely professional entities who perform their duties in issuing documentation in the correct and proper manner. There's also a minority who don't follow the same high exceptional levels. And these companies, they either knowingly or unknowingly create issues for the parties, the stakeholders that handle the NVOCC bills of lading. And these issues can be simple oversights, or they can be more serious and coordinated attempts at fraud and malpractice by deliberately misrepresenting the information on the bills of lading. So the NVOCC register is really seeking to acknowledge or recognise those companies that have a limited, not limited, but they've met certain anti-fraud standards in their operations. When we talk about bill of lading manipulation, we're talking really about the multiple financing of cargo, the same cargo, and we're talking about deliberate collusion between related buyers and sellers. The targets in almost all these cases are the banks. In one recent series, this is all series which are all connected, the IMB had received more than 700 bills of lading from 75 different banks. The cargoes on the bills of lading are copper cathodes, nickel briquettes, these types of cargoes. And these are put on the bills of lading to facilitate the attempted frauds. The buyers and sellers are related parties. They are clearly related, but the transactions are presented to the banks to give the impression that it's an arm's length transaction and perhaps something safer to finance. There is, however, clear evidence of fraud, BL manipulation. In almost all the cases that we've looked at, the BLs were issued by the NVOCCs who were unduly influenced by the alleged cargo owners. The NVOCCs, they are compliant and they are following the improper wishes, if you like, of the cargo owners. And they are told, or they are being asked to issue bills of lading, which they are following. They are simply following these instructions. We also see issues when the cargoes are deliberately misrepresented. And just to give one example, which we were involved in recently, the bank once again thought it was dealing with copper cathodes. We had containerised shipments going from North America to Asia. Any superficial check into the bill of lading would confirm that there was an underlying shipment or an underlying movement of containers. What was actually being shipped, however, is not the high-value copper cathodes. We actually had very low-value recycled products. And what we also had from this NVOCC was a rather elaborate website where you could actually go online, you could confirm that the cargo had been loaded, and you could verify the tracking and movements of the containers. And the use of these false websites by some of these NVOCCs is quite systemic. We have examples of chemicals, for instance, where there's been a succession of NVOCC websites, and they're all linked, if you know where to look. We have issues with sanctions. There are certain companies that will repeatedly and deliberately misrepresent the material facts on the bills of lading. They are doing this to circumvent certain sanctions regimes, the regulations that are in place. To give another example, one of our member banks made a routine check into a bill. We provided a response. Based on that response, the bank then decided to check all recent transactions from this particular trader. We had more than 75 bills of lading sent to us.
So do you expect that shipping companies need to verify the quality of the goods which are shipped? The bill says said to contain.
It says said to contain. This is why it's difficult for to actually get that confirmation. But in that previous example, it was the carrier who told us what was actually declared. So there was a mismatch in what was with the carrier and what was actually on the bills of lading that went to the bank. But just to go back to the sanctions example, so we had 78, I think, of these bills of lading from this one company. And they're mainly bulk, but mostly containerised NVOCC bills of lading, of fertiliser, going from the UAE to countries like India, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and so on, and the Philippines. But none of these shipments had actually taken place from Jebel Ali, which is what was on the bills of lading. They had all been loaded in Bandar Abbas in Iran. But it was the fact that the NVOCC had willfully and deliberately disguised or misrepresented the material facts. The bank was led into this transaction because they were reliant on that document, and perhaps reliant on the client as well. Just as a final twist, once the evidence was presented that these were Iranian shipments, we were then sent more documents trying to suggest that the goods had been shipped from Central Asia through Poti down to Jebel Ali and then on their way out to where they were going. But all of this was wrong. All of this was manipulation. And these are just some of the cases that the NVOCC Register will try to address.
Thank you, Michael. Now we have heard all the opening remarks of the panel, and I think it's becoming clear to everyone here that the banks have to rely upon on the face of it. The banks have to rely on the documents as presented to them. And it is very easy, particularly with intermediaries like NVOCCs, for those documents to be manipulated. And when they are manipulated, of course, the bank has no idea whether they are financing a real cargo or not. This is essentially the problem that we are facing. And I'd like to go back now to Stephen, because Stephen mentioned, I'm jumping a little bit over here, but Stephen mentioned the new developments which are taking place in Singapore, with respect to blockchain, distributed ledger technology and others. And the question here is, Stephen, do you think that some of these technologies will deal with the risk of the manipulation of bills of lading?
Yes,
it's a very loaded question. Apologies.
Yeah. As Baldev mentioned, all this will help, but the notion of fraud will come into picture anyway. You see, in the instance of NVOCC, I think through our experience, we see some of these telling tales is like, for example, BL. If there's a discrepancy on BL, if the beneficiary can amend the BL, something is not very right? It could have been given the whole set of the pre-approved BL. This happens, you see. So with all this register or sharing of data, it will help. Somehow will help. To identify, like for example, a BL has been sent to another bank for financing. So this bank will get it. See, I have an alert here where it says it has been financed by another bank. So that's how it will help. Yeah.
Anyone else from the panel would like to comment on that? Ram, would you like to comment on it, or?
I think where it will help is if the trail is clear enough from one party to another, ultimately leading it to be stamped as, say, the BL has been redeemed or spent to a point, so that it doesn't come back into the banking channel. That's where it will help to prevent fraud. But where it cannot prevent is a differentiation between a low-value copper cathode versus a high-value copper cathode, or what has gone into the. It probably can, but it will probably take time, or that chain also need to be captured in terms of what was actually loaded.
Yes.
Right. So everyone in the chain need to be able to put an electronic stamp saying that, yeah, this is what was loaded actually, and this loading is correct. Yeah. Yes. So eventually, there shouldn't be a job for you or for Michael. Yes, sorry about it.
I think if I may add, so it needs a lot of participation, a lot of parties' participations, and that's where the sharing data comes to the picture.
Yes.
Otherwise, if it's only few banks who are participating or shipping company, it doesn't going to help, right?
And we are talking perhaps not just about banks, but we're talking of all the other
parties,
all the other stakeholders in this transaction. Baldev, if you want to.
I think once again the words are taken out of my mouth. I think blockchain, my cynical view, is like communism. Everyone needs to play along for it to work. One person decides, one bank in the Middle East, in India, in South America decides, I'm going to finance outside of this chain. That's the end of it. I mean, your efficiency goes out the window. So there's a lot of talk about blockchain and how it'll change the world. Yes, it'll make things much more efficient. I still maintain the cynical view, that it won't eradicate fraud because money is made in the gray areas, and people like it that way.
That's a very, very important remark. Aarti?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't think that few years back we'll ever be able to travel the country without a camera. But we now travel only with a phone. And that phone is our communication to the external world. That phone is for our messages. That phone is for our camera. That phone is for our emails. It's like one single platform doing multiple things which we probably would not have envisaged 10 years back at all. So sitting down today and thinking of bills of lading, the issues that we have seen in the past in terms of duplicate bills of lading, forged bills of lading, making sure that whether there's actually a set of goods inside the container at all to begin with, and also is it being priced rightly? Is there an under-invoicing? Is there an over-invoicing of this pricing? All of these have been faced in the past multiple times. One such attempt to get over at least the duplicate financing that we don't do with respect to representation of the bills of lading is typically where the blockchain is, which actually comes in, gives you the entire audit trail of end to end as to whether the particular bills of lading has been issued, what is the bill of lading number, what was the actual shipment in that, can be quite well identified end to end if you actually truly embrace the blockchain. But whether you'll be able to ensure that the overpricing, underpricing, whether there's actual commodity inside that particular container, the answer is perhaps we're still too early. We can't solve multiple problems. So we've started solving one part of the problem, but there are still multiple problems with respect to pricing, with respect to seeing what is inside the container, and the NVOCC problem is still there. But at least it's good to know that people are coming together to form a community to start solving it via a blockchain, at least one part of the problem. So it'll be interesting. We've been talking about blockchain for a very long time. It's like a few years back we thought about the entire concept about BPO, blank payment obligation, and we did 1 or 2 transactions and that's it. So when you compare the BPO to a blockchain, it's a little bit more advanced stage where different communities are coming together in order to solve a common universal problem, as opposed to just the BPO, 2 people trying to solve a problem. At least here the community is coming together. Whether this community can solve the problem in the next 5 years, no. But whether the community will start solving the problem, perhaps the answer is yes. 10 years, 15 years, hopefully this blockchain becomes another platform as my phone is what my fingers are crossed. I'll do bet on that horse as well.
Aarti, thank you very much. I think there are people in the audience who have been working on some of these developments. So before we close this, I think it would not be fair unless we give people a chance to give their views on how you see this thing moving forward. Is there anyone from the audience? Yes, I see a hand raised.
Thanks, Thomas. Thank you, Muku. Let me introduce myself. I'm Lee Ju-song of ICC Asia, based in Singapore. I would also like, on behalf of Daniel and Enterprise Singapore, thanks the panelists for making time for us and sharing with us their expert views and their experiences. I would like to take this opportunity to share with these distinguished panelists as well as our participants here that in our joint fight against fraud, I believe there is another community which can contribute to the fight against fraud. That is the Chamber of Commerce. Because the Chamber of Commerce in many countries have been authorized by their governing agency to issue certificates of origin, which is a very important international trade document which facilitates trade. At the same time, it's also a very important document which tracks shipment. And at the same time, it would also provide ownership because the document is required to provide, in order for the Chamber of Commerce to issue a certificate of origin, the Chamber of Commerce are obliged to ensure that due diligence are being conducted to make sure that there is actually actual shipment as declared in the certificates of origin. And I'm also very pleased to share with this August gathering that the ICC has set up an international standard for the issuance of certificates of origin, and we have a verification website which is managed by Paris, based in our HQ office. So if a certificate of origin is being issued based on our international issuing standards, it will have the label of ICC, and it is going to be linked to our website for verification by any stakeholders or anybody who has got access to that particular document. Currently, more than 7 million of the CO worldwide is carrying these what we call ICC quality label. And therefore, I believe that in our joint fight against fraud of this nature, we should involve the Chamber of Commerce, because the issuance of CO is very much linked to BL, especially when a CO is required to cover shipment of goods from a second to a third country. The original BL has to be provided and attached as an important supporting document for such a shipment. In other shipment, again, the Chamber of Commerce would also ask for the BL to ensure that there's actual shipment, and the BL documents details should tally with all the other declarations which are being which are being declared in the application of certificates of origin. So I would like to appeal, to our traders as well as the banking community not to exclude, these other role played by Chamber of Commerce. They can provide a very important tier of profiling for the banking community as well as for other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There's a comment here.
Yeah, we spoke about NVOCCs, which normally, most of them are good, and there are few, instances where they misrepresent the underlying trade or the cargo. Now, when the investigation takes place or IMB comes out or within the bank there is an investigation, of course, legal, lawyers also do that. What is a loop back to the companies, those who misrepresent this, so that, going forward, at least we'll have some of those bad companies or bad, NVOCs, they should be, barred from issuing or conducting business, because, at least there's some kind of cleaning exercise also goes on simultaneously. Otherwise, we'll be fighting our own battle everywhere. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. So the question really is, is there a loop back in terms of trying to exclude people who habitually present these false documents repeatedly? And can that be, because otherwise we are not learning the lessons from what, yes. There are a number of issues in respect of this. But I'm just wondering, maybe Aarti, can I ask you to give the first one?
Mine will be a bias.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Ram, would you like to add something to that?
It's a good suggestion, but I think it's rather difficult to implement really, because one is hopefully the registry should take care of it. Otherwise, globally you cannot implement it. Even if you have internally within a bank, you can do something about it. The problem is, even within a bank, given the limitations in terms of systems and all that, it's very, very difficult to capture such information as to which bill of lading terms are, right? So, good suggestion. should work. Blockchain probably is an answer. No, just joking. But yeah, because blockchain has become like a Panadol actually, so for everything. So yeah, but maybe the registry can take something on board really.
Yes.
So.
I think it's going to be the registers who's going to solve this, but I don't want very
Yes.
biased opinion. I don't know if I want an independent opinion which actually.
Michael?
In terms of the going back on those NVOCCs that perhaps manipulate the bills of lading, I think there will be some comments from the register about that. But if I could just go back to that first example that I gave, when it started, there was one NVOCC that was being used. And then within a couple of months, almost, the banks became aware that, there may be issues with this particular NVOCC and their agent. So what we started to see then were other bills of lading coming in on the letterheads of other NVOCCs, signed off by other agents. So it's a difficult one to police, if you want to use that sort of terminology, because the people who are involved in this are quite creative, and they know how the system works, and they know what checks are sometimes being made. But I think there may be something in the register and what's in there that would also partially help with the issues.
Yeah, I think probably works as well for your internal blacklisting. If you see this perpetual kind of trend that you say that the NOCC is not really giving you any comfort. So register works. Probably your internal kind of blacklist may work.
I think this is leading on to where, what kind of response is a good thing to have. And I think the answer that's coming forward, possibly from this discussion, is that with NVOCCs, you could have a huge number of NVOCCs, who just keep on producing these documents. There is very little control upon them unless there is a system where some are preferred to others, and this is what the NVOCC Registry is trying to achieve. So if you don't meet some minimum standards, then you may find that the banks may not be prepared, and the traders therefore may not be prepared to use you to produce those documents because you don't have credibility in the market. And this is really maybe one of the ways forward. But you're absolutely right. What we have seen, I think, in the last 10 years is that because there has been no loop back, there's this whole area has just simply grown. And you get NVOCCs, often selling newspapers during the day, and in the afternoon or lunch break, they are issuing bills of lading, which is being presented to banks, regardless of the consequences upon the various stakeholders involved. And of course, traders love it, because they can get the NVOCC to say whatever they wanted to say on that document. So that's one of the weaknesses. Baldev, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or?
Just a quick point. I'm not sure how effective it would be, because just like we have fraudsters who are, I could be the distinguished businessman today, a fraudster tomorrow, and I can repackage myself to become a distinguished businessman again. And I think the NVOCC could be blacklisted, and it could re-emerge it in another form again. And so that continuing cycle still goes on. So it's a matter of eliminating some of the ones that are quite bad, but it might come back in the phoenix might arise again.
Thank you. Are there? Yes, sir. There's a question from the back.
Hi, my name is Sochine. I'm a colleague of Stephen Tang, ex-colleague actually, because I just retired. 2 weeks into my retirement, but I still find it, very passionate about what I'm doing in trade finance. Well, I want to raise one couple of points, but Dev is looking at me. No. It's not. Well. Okay. I think the first point is this. Now, if this register is being introduced, now there might be a need, for UCP to make some changes to the UCP 600. Now, the reason is this: if you look back, I think 1974, we have UCP 290. I live in that. I come from that era. UCP 290 actually prohibits, forwarder PL that includes NVOCC PLs. Then came along 400. 400 actually, it does allow NVOCC PL to be issued, right, in 400. No, 400, it must be FIATA approved bills of lading. And then 500 superseded that 400 and now allow freight forwarder or multimodal operator to issue bills of lading. And 600 is now totally open. There are no restrictions whatsoever. And this is where I think we have this issue now with NVOCC PLs floating around. I think we see a lot of NVOCC PLs, unless it is a commodity trade where charter party bills of lading are issued. So this brings me to the point that in a sense, then ICC would have to make some consequential changes to UCP 600 in order to bring NVOCC PLs into letters of credit. That's my point, first. The second point that I want to make, of course, if that is not changed, then it is for the applicants to actually incorporate into the LC that if it is issued by a forwarder, it must be up in the register. So these are things that probably will need to be made. That's one point. The second point, which I just discussed this morning with Bardev, and I'm actually quite troubled because in one NVOCC PL called for under an LC, there were many telltale signs that this is something not quite regular, and one of which is it doesn't bear any container number on the bill of lading. My question to Mukutun is this: does it warrant the banks to check further as an AML issue, not so much as a discrepancy, but I think if the bank had done that, fraud would have been discovered. It could have saved the customer, the financial loss. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all those 3 points are very, very valid. Let me just try and respond since you asked me for the last one, and maybe others on the panel would like to also comment on it. The issue of the container numbers, as you correctly pointed out, there is nothing in the UCP which requires container numbers to be mentioned on a bill of lading, and so it is open. But it is a matter of shipping practice, that if you don't have a container number on a bill of lading, you will simply not be able to put your hands on that container at any time. No shipping company is going to entertain your request for a containerized cargo which does not have a container number, because the system does not work like that. So it is education for the banks, and if the banks are told that a container bill of lading must have a container number, if it doesn't have a container number, it should be a major red flag, and you need to make further inquiries. And a simple response would be to go back to the customer and say, well, how do you think you're going to collect your cargo at the destination with this piece of paper? And that he has got to answer that, because the container number must be on that document. The issue also that you mentioned about the bills of lading issuer being required to be a member of the register. It's an interesting thought. I think maybe in I'm open to suggestions here, but I think that even in today's UCP, there is nothing to stop a condition being put on the UCP which says that the issuer of the BL must be registered, properly registered, and then be complying with the code of conduct, and some documentary evidence of that being produced. That may be an easy way out, rather than getting a change to the UCP, which could take quite a long time, and maybe then we will be in the world of, really in the world of blockchain.
Because any document can be prepared.
That is.
So it's going to be another piece of paper.
That, yes, the comment is made here that any document in any case can be prepared, which is true. Which is true. You can't challenge that, because the whole of the UCP is based upon documents.
Yeah, I think the other point on UCP, see, it is again relies on the national committees. See, you want to make any changes, they go through a voting kind of thing. I think we have, those who have attended the ICC meetings will see. You don't want to make a changes. It depends on the national committees. Those, I think, that's where it comes. So it has to be, if change to happen, it has to be acceptance of all the national committees.
Which takes time.
Yeah.
And changing the UCP, and people have said that maybe it's time to have a new UCP, but then you're looking possibly at maybe 5 to 10 years before it effectively comes out. So, but there may be workarounds around it, and that would be to have a condition in the letter of credit itself. I'll come back. I'll tell you exactly in a short while how the registry is going to work and how the code of conduct really applies. And then this whole discussion will begin to make a little more sense. But I'd like to just come back on the point that was made by Jusong earlier on regarding the role of the ICC. There are two ways to attack a problem of this kind. One is, of course, for regulators to step in with a heavy hand and say, this is the regulation, you don't do this, and we'll come with a big hammer and we're going to hit you very badly. That is one way. But this is a business problem. And really what we should be looking for is a business solution. And there is no organization, I think, which has the international reach to deal with a problem of this kind, as Jusong said, except for the ICC. First of all, the ICC is very active in trade. UCP is one of their products and many other such products. So the ICC has a very important role to play. And I think the point that Jusong was making is that with the electronic or the certificates of origin, which are vetted properly, that could be another way to link it to bills of lading and prevent multiple bills of lading from being produced, provided the first link is very strong, very robust. And that could be something to think about as we go on talking about this new infrastructure. So it's a thought. So there are a number of ways to approach it. Yes.
So the IMB NVOCC register, it's a good initiative to address the risk. But when we approach IMB for any BL information, normally IMB approaches the agent or the respective companies. It takes from 24 hours to 48 hours to get back to the answer. Is there any other initiative from IMB in line with the NVOCC register to link with major shipping companies so that you will have online information which can be supplied to the bank so that there won't be any delay in?
So, I think, Michael, do you want to mention, or shall I just take this question? Okay. Thank you. So, there is a problem if you're going to approach. We don't have a system yet where there is a requirement upon the physical carriers to provide this information promptly. And this is one of the reasons why we have devised the NVOCC register, because it kind of circumvents this idea, because the NVOCC by itself is required to produce evidence, backup evidence upon which it has issued that NVOCC BL. And it could be the copy of the master BL, it could be the authority to issue that document and others. There is a duty upon them to produce it. And provided it is in their economic interest to participate, then of course we have a good solution. In the meantime, we are talking to at least the global carriers, and there is a growing awareness among the carriers that their documents are being forged and used, and they are in some cases they are very worried about it, because these are very expensive ships, and the last thing they want is the ship going into Shanghai, for example, and there are multiple claims on that cargo. This is their concern. And so if they know about it, they will try and deal with it in advance. Michael and I know of a case where one of the shipping companies took out advertisements in all the major newspapers in China, telling them that this document, bill of lading, was false, in advance of the vessel's arrival in China. It's a huge cost for them to do that. But they did it because they were worried about the ship on charter to a first-class charterer being delayed in port in China with multiple claims. So there is an awareness by them. So I think with this, hopefully the momentum will increase and we will get better cooperation all around. That's a hope. So
it's going to address only the part of the problem, whereas there are shipping companies working on linking with various other shipping companies to provide online information. So the IMB takes the initiative and gets the information from all the major shipping companies, and at least this will address part of it.
Yes, I mean the shipping companies share information with other companies, but there are particular kinds of information may not address this particular problem. But the point is made. At least the infrastructure is growing. Baldev, do you want to say anything on this, or you're?
Yes, I will say something, because sometimes we act for the credit insurer, so we have to prove the fraud. So we have to go and speak to the shipping companies. Did you issue this bill? Is this right? Blah blah blah. They are quite reticent. I think they're quite reluctant to tell you anything. They are slow to tell you whether there's even a different BL in their system. I've come across instances where the shipping company office in Bangladesh says one thing, the one in Singapore says a different thing, and you think, how can you guys not get this right? So they are red flags. And I think what the ICC is doing is trying to circumvent that somewhat by having the NVOCC register there to take some comfort out of that. But you still have the issue of the carrier itself. My view is that the best way of doing it is that you get the BL direct from the person that issued it, who saw the goods, placed it on, signed it off. That's the best way. So in the old days, you get it from the ocean, you get it from the carrier. Carrier should give it direct to the bank. The problem is that when it passes to the trader then has this piece of paper, and he might get a bit greedy, or he might do something silly with it, manipulate the document before it gets to the bank. So you want to cut out that chain where it goes through too many different individuals in that process, and narrow it down to person who saw the goods and person who received it.
It's not practically not possible.
I know.
Okay, like kind of oil, it changes hands.
It changes hands before the bill can even. Yeah, I agree with that. Yes.
Any other comments from the panel? There is also another aspect to this, and that is, ship owners rely upon charterers for their employment, and some of these big charterers are involved in these multiple bills of lading for various things like synthetic trade transactions and things like that. So, and the ship owners rightly don't want to upset the person who's going to employ them. So there is that nervousness there. We can overcome it, and we have done so by talking even to the charterers and asking the questions, which puts them on notice that and then they explain what has happened. So there are a number of nuances to this problem. But I think before we go to the NVOCC register and the code of conduct, the one area that we have not covered is what is the legal position with respect to the banks in the banking chain where a fraudulent transaction, fraudulent bill of lading has been identified. And I'm very sorry, Baldev, to keep coming back to you on this, but I wonder if you can, the fraud exception, under how does that work with the UCP 600, because that's very relevant to this discussion today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something I should have touched on in my overview as well. To take a step back, the LC represents an autonomous obligation. You're meant to pay come hell, come high water, regardless of whatever dispute you have with the buyer and seller underlying. They don't go into the nitty-gritty of the disputes. There's only one exception to it under English law, and I emphasize the word English law. I'll come to it. You'll see why in a second. English law says there is one exception, and the exception is fraud. This is also something that is reflected in the UCP as well, that fraud is the only basis on which a bank can refuse to pay. Now, we've all been through the issue of identifying a fraud. It is extremely hard to do so. I would go one point further to say that different countries have different views as to what the exception should be. So in Singapore, for example, we have fraud that you cannot pay. We also have unconscionability. And this is where lawyers make their money, because no one knows what unconscionability means. So you go to the lawyer and it could mean one of 10 different things. We know it when we see it, but we can't tell you what it is. And that's true of, you can ask any court in Singapore as well, they'll tell you the same thing. It refuses definition. Why do you have a difference between English law, Singapore law, and other aspects? It will show up when you're making your claim under the LC. So the LC itself might not say what is the governing law of it. Typically you have, to go into the technicalities of it, you've got your issuing bank, you've got your nominated bank or confirming bank on the other side. And so the LC is a square chain that goes on, the LCs that move on. Each document represents a separate obligation. That separate obligation is governed by a different law, perhaps, if it's not stated specifically. So one might be English law, one might be Singapore law, depending on where the bank is, if you don't specify. That might give you more leeway in and out. It just becomes a problem because it's unclear. It's not consistent across the 3 or 4 counts. Back to fraud. Let's use Singapore, for example. The number of times it's been proven, fraud has been proven in an LC situation. I think I can count them with my hands. It's extremely notoriously difficult to prove. And I think that exception is what causes the problems for the bank, because they have to pay unless they can prove fraud. Does that answer the question? Or?
Yes. Yes. I have to bow to your knowledge on this. But I think also, on the other hand, the banks are faced with a regulatory pressure. You know, that if they do make a payment where there is no underlying cargo, there are strong grounds that there's no underlying cargo, then you have the issue of AML, whether they have applied proper AML or sanctions, they have checked for sanctions with all the huge penalties that flow, maybe?
Yeah, sanctions is a big problem now. It's ever evolving. There's always a new sanction coming out. The bank are the ones who are the interface of this process, and it's difficult for them, I have to say. And you can't. I don't think it's been tested where you don't pay under an LC because of a sanction. You say, I'm not paying because of sanctions. But maybe Stephen could enlighten.
If I may relate a case,
yes.
Okay. This was something shipped to Nepal. There was some fraud happening, and the Central Bank of Nepal says you shouldn't make any payment because there's no cargo. Exactly what he was saying. It really happens. And to add one Baltis have mentioned, I think it depends on which jurisdiction you are in. For example, certain countries it's so easy to obtain an injunction. Yeah, but not in Singapore, that's for sure. Over the years, I've been taking care of more than 14 countries, and see, most difficult is in Singapore, and in some places it's so easy. You want an injunction, immediately you can get it tomorrow. Yeah. So what you have mentioned just now is true. Some jurisdiction, I don't know, it was some time ago, it may have changed, but it was a clear instruction from the central bank. You should not, even your bank, you're obligated to pay, okay, under an LC. You should not pay because there's no shipment.
And I think it's not only Nepal, but there are many other countries where... there are many other countries where these kind of decisions come through. So, okay, so we have, I hope over the last hour or so, we have discussed all these various aspects of the manipulation of bills of lading. The consequences of it is very clear now for the banks. and for the and really for the carriers and the traders as well, because they should really not be engaging in this. And there is this huge gray area with respect to whether you can or cannot prove fraud to such an extent that you can avoid payment by going to court. But against that, you have the regulatory pressure that you don't want to, you don't want it to be revealed that you have made a payment on either a sanctioned shipment or a cargo where the cargo does not exist because of AML issues. Now, what I'd like to do very quickly is to look at the NVOCC register. I'll tell you how it all fits into our discussion today. So, fantastic. So the whole idea of the NVOCC register is that it is a business solution to a business problem. It's not with the enforcement authorities or regulators. We're trying to solve this problem, and the only way you can solve it is if you can make it in the economic interest of the NVOCC to raise his standards of operation. If you're not able to do that, of course, the whole thing will fall away. And we'll come back to how that can work. So with this, we invite, the NVOCC register is open today, and we invite NVOCCs to sign up to the register. So and the underlying fact here is that of all the bills of lading that we check, over 95% of the false bills of lading are issued by NVOCCs. Very simply because if you are really a carrier's agent, a proper actual carrier's agent, you cannot afford, to take that kind of chance. So this is directed at the NVOCCs. We ask them to sign up to the register. When they sign up to the register, that information is made available to all the banks who wish to know about it. So the banks will know whether when they look at a bill of lading, whether that issuer is a member of the register, and therefore, if he's a member of the register, automatically he has got to comply with the code of conduct. This is very important. So the banks now know that this issuer has got to meet some minimum standards. I'll tell you how this is enforced in a business sense. Now, so the NVOCC register and the code of conduct are inextricably linked. It encourages once the NVOCC follows the code of conduct, he is required to do a number of things. One of which is that he has got to, when he issues a bill of lading, he has to have documentation available with him, which has got confirmation that he has the authority to issue that bill of lading from the actual carrier. He has got to have a master bill of lading available to him. Because the whole principle of this is that you can't have an NVOCC BL which is unconnected to a master BL. It has got to be anchored in that master BL. So you don't have a huge number of NVOCC bills of lading floating around, being used for all kinds of purposes, multiple financing, fraud, all these sanctions busting, which are not rooted in the master bill of lading. And the NVOCC is required to have that document with him. So, if he has got that document, he's complying with the code of conduct. When we have a question about a bill of lading, and it appears to us that the bill of lading is false, we will write to the NVOCC and we will say, can you please produce the documentation, the backup documentation, on the basis of which you have issued your NVOCC BL. He's required to produce that within 24 hours. So then he has got to provide an explanation of how he came to issue that document. If he can provide it, that is fine, we will accept it. But if he can't provide that evidence, proper evidence, then in footballing terms, it counts as a single, as a yellow card, one yellow card. In his year of membership of the register, he's only allowed 2 yellow cards. If he, after the second yellow card, we will write to him again and we will tell him that, you can't carry on like this. The solution is that we will remove you from the register, or you have to go through you have to put your key people through a training program so they understand the real role that the bill of lading plays in the international trade transaction. So we encourage him to improve his standards, and he has got to show other steps that he has taken to make sure that these bills of lading are not issued recklessly by him. Sure.
Just going back to my question earlier, and if the NVOCC is proved that it was a false bill of lading which the NVOCC had issued, then in that sense, why yellow card? Straightway it should be red card.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Why a yellow card? The whole idea of this, what we're trying to do is not to exclude anyone from participating, because it is in our interest to make sure that he raises his standards, not that we push him out, because once we push him out, he will continue to issue these documents. So we want to give him the chance to raise his standards, and we hope he will do it, because what we are calling upon the banks to do is, when you receive a bill of lading where the issuer is not on the register, and you can check that for free, to check whether he is on the register or not. If you find that, please turn around to your customer and say, next time, would you please tell your NVOCC to actually sign up to the register and comply, because it gives us the assurance that this document has been more responsibly issued. And so we are trying to raise the standards. We are not trying to exclude. Because I think it's it's better for the industry if we can raise the standards rather than excluding it. So that is the whole approach of this thing, and we hope he will stay in, because if his customer, if the shipper of the cargo turns around to him and says that, listen, why don't you go and sign up to this register and comply with the code, because my bank has just made this comment that they would prefer this document to be issued by a company which complies with this code of conduct. And it helps the bank as well, because if it is a Friday afternoon and you are under pressure to process the transaction, when you look at it, if the guy is complying with the code of conduct, he's a member of the register, it's another box to be ticked. And you may wish perhaps to process the transaction, pending checks to be done subsequently. That could be a check. But the important thing is we make it in the NVOCC's economic interest to actually raise the standards and not carry on doing what they are doing today, which is recklessly issuing bills of lading.
Will there be any notice in the BL itself, or we need to approach IMB for the registration notice?
No, I think that a notation in the BL may not serve the purpose, because it can be forged. If they are forging everything else, that can be forged. But I think that you will have access. You will have access to the register, so there's no problem. You can just check it, and you know whether they are on it or not. But it does not remove the need to make the checks, but that can come subsequently. But at least we are trying to close this huge gap, vulnerability that we have today. Sorry, sir, I've kept you waiting. Yes.
Sorry. I presume that you'll be approaching about 40,000 freight forwarders. How are you going to get them in? Are you approaching them, or is it going to be, is IMB going to them, or what? I mean, there are 40,000 freight forwarders around,
Yes.
So how many of them you expect them all to register, or how?
We have made presentations at the Congress, the FIATA Congress, about it, and they are quite happy with this arrangement.
Okay.
I think the way it's not an easy thing to contact freight forwarders all around the world. But I think the more important way to approach them is when they issue a bill of lading, it goes to a bank for checking. We come to know about it, and then the pressure comes upon them to sign up.
So
that
it depends very much on the banks coming back to you.
I think the banks are very important in the pressure that they can apply. They're unique in that position. And it's economic pressure. You're not applying anything else. You are not saying that you're not going to process the transaction. You will process the transaction. It may take a little more time.
Yes. You mentioned something about synthetic LCs and all that. I don't know the banks here, they could even accept copy bills of lading.
Well, that is a different discussion we'll have to have another time, It's a big thing. Yes, Ramesh, hi.
Does it mean that any NVOCC which is registered, can they also say that, they will not be able to share the shipment details with you? And sometimes we do get reports where the shipment details are not, damaged or, to IMB also. So, will there be any case if the NVOCC is registered, but still they choose to not divulge the shipment details?
No, the code of conduct is very clear. That the code of conduct requires them to keep the backup documentation, and if asked, to produce it. We are not asking anything secretive, nothing confidential. We just want evidence that they are authorized to issue that bill of lading, and they have a master bill of lading ideally there, or some other document, similar document which gives that link to the master BL. So I don't think that is a confidential document. So you got a question? Yes, please.
Thank you. Well, I think it's a very good attempt to actually meet NVOCC bona fide. Now, I have the question on, I'm sure you're aware of the FIATA multimodal transport bills of lading. Now, this is in conformance to the ICC UNCTAD Rules Article 481. Now, these members who actually authorized to issue the FIATA bills of lading falls under the registry, the multimodal transport registry. In different jurisdictions, you have different controls, but ultimately there's an agreement signed with FIATA. Now, so there is a sort of a non-regulatory but self-regulatory control by the FIATA, International Federation of Freight Forwarders Association, from which I'm from. I'm from FIATA actually. Now, so I'm just wondering, does the members of the registry of FIATA, multimodal transport operator, who are authorized under agreement to issue the MVO bills of lading of FIATA, require to join the registry? That's global I'm talking about,
yes.
Not only Singapore.
This particular register, the IMB NVOCC register, is a different register. What we are trying to do is to just verify that the NVOCC has the authority to issue that particular bill of lading in respect of that shipment. The fact that they are part of the FIATA registry does not really answer that particular question. And so I think that they would still have to sign up to this registry.
I was looking through your website on this code of conduct,
Sure.
The ICC one. Now, when I look at the code of conduct website, the code of conduct items are good, but is of lesser minimum standards than the FIATA registry minimum standards, which has even a liability insurance cover requirement to check the liability cover by each of the registry members globally. So, well, if you look at this in the sense that the FIATA registry members are much more stringent in terms of fulfilling a code of conduct, perhaps you may want to compare that, because here you don't have, for example, any mention of liability insurance cover.
No.
Whereas the FIATA one has a US $500,000 cover requirements globally if they want to become a registry member to issue the FIATA bills of lading, on top of many of the conducts that you mentioned. So I applaud the efforts of the IMB MVO register, which is good. I mean, the idea is fantastic. But wouldn't it be for those members who are with a more stringent code, how do you harmonize that?
Well, two things. First of all, the kind of NVOCCs we are talking about are probably not the kind of NVOCCs who will sign up to the FIATA register. That's the first thing. And will definitely not have the liability cover that you are saying. Definitely, I can tell you that. So we are talking of a different group of companies. But the other thing is that it is not a question of liability insurance here. The question is of good practice. You should not do it. Whether you have insurance or you don't have insurance, you still should not be issuing a bill of lading recklessly.
But that is already covered in the FIATA registry.
Sure.
If you are not registered, you're not allowed to issue the FIATA bill of lading, and you have to fulfill the criteria, code of practices of the registry. So my question here lies in whether the FIATA registry members, the MTO registry, which is a very strict register, are they required to register for the IMB MVO register? That is the question, yeah.
Because we are working in this particular thing, it's only on the issuance of the bill of lading. It's a very narrow niche. And we would say, I will talk to FIATA. We have very good connections with them. We are talking to them all the time. So we will speak to them about it. But I think that we would still want, for this purpose, for them to sign up to the NVOCC register, because it puts upon them a different burden of accountability than what would be there in the overall NVOCC operation, which FIATA is trying to achieve. And you know, this way there is the penalty. There is a penalty of they have to go through a process in which they have to, if at all they are involved in this, they have to go through a process to confirm that they will not do it again, or they risk being removed from it. I think that, well, let me talk to FIATA about it, and we will talk.
We can dialogue. I mean the board of FIATA in Switzerland.
Yes.
So
maybe we should have a discussion.
We should dialogue more.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. But our view is that this is a very different application. And when I discussed it in New Delhi at the FIATA Congress, it was very well received, and the people want it, because no self-respecting NVOCC wants to see other so-called NVOCCs abusing the system underneath. Huh? So we are on the same page. Okay, so...
Will there be a cost for NVOCC?
Yes, there will be a cost. So over here, it will increase the accountability of the NVOCCs, and it increases the credibility of the documents they issue, and hence they have an economic interest. And that is what we are trying to achieve over here. And the code of conduct, you'll see the code of conduct there. It's on our website. We think that it is a win-win proposal for all the stakeholders, and that's how the system is going to work. And it's up there on our website. These are just a few slides just to show you there. You can go in there and have a look, and the code of conduct is there in full, and the registration form as well. We would call upon the banking industry to help us to push this forward, because it is in our interest, and it closes a major vulnerability which was identified in our discussions with one of the big trading banks a few years ago when they identified this particular problem. So it's coming from the banking industry, and we are just offering the solution on this. Okay? So are there any more questions? Or any more questions or issues? If that's the case, I'd like to just ask my panel if they have any last remarks to make before we close the session. Anyone? We have covered it all. Thank you very much. And first of all, thanks our panel. Thank you to our panel for having taken the time off. Thanks to all of you for coming and making this a great session. Thank you.